Hey, you just used the mouse too.
I know, I was telling you not to accidentally touch this.
The screen. Nice.
Testing 1, 2, 3, testing 1, 2, 3.
Hello.
Welcome to our study session. Today is Tuesday, March 16th, 2021. Welcome to those in attendance and also those online. Let's start by indicating who's here, beginning with Connie.
Connie Burgess,
Clark Nelson.
Nicole McDermott,
Martin Bates, Superintendent.
Julie Jackson,
Chris Wynn.
Terry Bodden.
And Karen Winder. Once again, thanks for joining us today. We have a little bit busy of an agenda for a study session, but all good topics. So with that, I think we'll jump right into our first item, which is a discussion on small schools led by Aaron Wilson and his team.
They're behind you.
Aaron, there you are.
Board members, you'll remember, over the last few months, we've had some conversations about the, well, among other things, the Davis demographic report and how that played out. There are some assumptions made in their calculations about optimal school size. And we had a conversation here about maybe coming back and talking about where that optimal school size came from, and that there might be some differences in how those get looked at. Please know, Connie and I were talking earlier, you don't need to make a decision about this tonight. This is information and some thinking that that you'll see reflected. And so Aaron, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Would you prefer my mask on or off? Is there can you hear me okay?
Well, I don't think the problem with hearing you has anything to do with the mask. It's proximity to the microphone.
Yeah, I don't know that we can do anything about that. We'll put in a capital request for Don.
Could you kneel down?
Yeah. I'll do my best.
Thank you.
So board members, thank you for this opportunity to present. So the presentation is, as the superintendent mentioned, is a follow-up to previous information, includes data, examples, and some summary of findings. I'll be walking through some introductory demographic and financial information in section 1, and then I will turn time over to elementary leadership and improvement directors, those who supervise principals of our elementary schools. And so as you can see, we're breaking the presentation into 2 sections here. So first, in order to look at any potential concerns about small schools, we first categorize schools across the district into 3 categories as small, medium, or large. These classifications were determined by the number of classes per grade level, not necessarily overall population. And that's an important distinction. And in the presentation, we'll find a recurring theme that the difficulties that small schools may experience aren't because of overall enrollment, but rather stemming generally from having 2 or fewer classes per grade level. You'll note that in the enrollment designation for large schools, that they're similar to the information presented in the Davis demographic study as having a minimum enrollment target for K-5 of about 550.
Aaron,
Yes.
I'm going to interrupt for just a moment. Board members, in some of the literature that you might see in your school board journals and so on, these numbers are Utah specific kind of numbers, and that has to do with our funding and our staffing ratios. Some of you will remember being in West Virginia a number of years ago at one of the NUFSED conferences and eating lunch in the commons of their high school, and one of the students was serving us, and I said, tell us, this is poor, economically depressed West Virginia, right? And said, what's your biggest class? And he said, my biggest class, let me see. There's 15 kids in my geometry class. Can you imagine trying to learn geometry with 15 students? And that's a different world than what we live in. And so it's important to be looking at, as you do reading in other parts of the country, their numbers, their class sizes are very different than what we deal with. So the number of classes per grade is perhaps the better metric to be looking at.
Correct, and thank you, Superintendent. We, in a future slide, we see how these number of classes per grade level impact and determine the class size, and we'll go through some examples to illustrate. Excellent, thank you. So on the right here, I'll give your attention to the last 3 years. We've taken all of the elementary schools in Granite, and we categorize them using this metric here is large, medium, or small. And you'll notice that in the past several years, we have seen a decrease in the number of large schools and an increase in the number of small schools. And this is because of decreasing overall district enrollment. Note, because we've defined it by classes per grade level rather than overall enrollment, that the school doesn't go from a medium to small or large to medium because of a reconfiguration and a loss of 6th grade. It can still be a large or still be a small school by losing 6th grade because of how they're defined. And so in my last portion of this introductory section, my clicker has decided that I should stay on this slide. It's very important that I should stay on.
It's over there, not. He can do it for you.
All right. Beep, I'll make that sound that means that we should advance to the next slide. Okay, that worked, good. So in this section here, I wanted to explain that funding sources like land trust, TSSA, even school FT allocations, they're based on the same formula school to school. The resources that schools received are all based off of the number of students that you have. And so we might think, well, funding is the same for all schools because the formula is the same. And while that's true, meaning that schools are funded by the same formulas, medium and larger schools have an easier time getting return on investment with their money because there's some fixed cost thresholds that these larger schools meet that small schools don't. So I have a Costco membership. I'm a proud Costco member, and it's the same principle. When you buy in bulk, you get more for your dollar. The same principle is true financially, in a financial sense, of schools, and we'll illustrate that. So some flat costs that could primarily benefit a larger school, such as purchasing a teacher or individuals on teacher contract. And so that's what I wanted to illustrate. So here, I took that same category of a small school, medium school, and large school, and then I'm over land trust and TSSA. And so I said, well, for the smallest of the small schools or the largest of the small schools, what was the range of land trust money that they received? And I listed that here, as you'll see. And then large school, and these are all elementary schools, keep in mind. And then I compared that with, well, let's say a brand new teacher and straight out of college, you know, they don't have their master's, they're brand new and claiming family insurance. That's about the cost that they would have. And keep in mind with a social worker, they need to have more advanced degrees, so they would cost more than this. So this is just as a teacher claiming family insurance. So let's say that elementary school wanted to fund an additional or some additional social work time. You'll find that they really are limited in even being able to fund a half. I mention this scenario because schools, particularly small schools, will troubleshoot funding scenarios with me, and they will say, hey, how can I get a social worker here all week? So 5 days a week. Now, social workers are allocated according to a formula. So each school gets some social worker time, but a small school, because they have less students, might only have a day or two. And they really can't pool their resources, their available resources, to buy those additional days as a larger school might. And so that's a common conversation I have with schools. And so you kind of get a sense of the buying power of large schools to have some of these flat costs versus smaller, I apologize, smaller schools that can't fund that. So my portion of this presentation is to give some demographic information about schools and kind of dispel the notion that they have the same access to resources. They do, they're funded by the same formula, but because the buying power is different and the threshold costs are the same, smaller schools generally don't have the same buying power as larger ones. This foundational information will lead to our elementary directors. I'm talking about some scenarios, how these things come at play, but I wanted to make sure board and superintendent that before I left this introductory section, that I could answer questions for you before I turn time over to our elementary directors. Okay,
I did actually have
Oh.
a question.
yes.
I'd be interested to know also, these are the financial limitations, and there must be also additional fixed costs
Yeah.
that you are paying if you're going to continue to have two schools rather than one school, for example. I think you addressed that later, but I guess that doesn't really affect, like, the child themselves doesn't see a difference in their education based on an extra fixed cost. I mean, maybe they see, one thing that the fixed cost does for the child is that maybe because the school is smaller, that the adults know the children better.
Yeah, and so.
Or something like, I'm trying to see, like, is there some way that us spending that extra money is helpful to the student? And then I think we're going to see also that ways that money could be better helpful to the student, but I just want to, like, see that connection a little bit.
Thank you, board member. That is a perfect segue to what our elementary directors are giving, because there are some implications. I apologize.
Connie, did you have a
Oh, I
question?
apologize, Connie.
I just was wondering if a small school was a Title I school, it's still this same type of thing goes for Title I also, depending on how many students are enrolled.
Correct. So a Title I allocation is also based off of the number of students that you have to get those additional Title I funding. And so it's the same formula that applies to them, but a Title I school, the difference between a Title I school and non is they likely have larger achievement gaps that correlate oftentimes with poverty. And so even though there is more money, the need is greater to merit having that money. And yes, but you're exactly right. And then the presentation where we get into this second section, it speaks to, okay, this is some way to frame our thinking about resources that schools get. What are the implications instructionally? And I like that from that student perspective. How would I know a difference between a small school that might have not as much resources? How does that affect my educational experience? And that's where we now head in our discussion.
Actually, I'm going to tangent us from that. Then we'll return. I guess there's also, if you have a small school who makes up for this land trust allocation, for example, in fundraising or something like that. I don't know. I just this week sat in a in a PTA meeting, and their fundraising was making my eyes enormous because I could not believe, and it was a small school, and they would have equally now have the same amount as a large school in land trust allocation. So I guess there are ways, if all things are perfect, for this not to affect a school.
Yeah, and something to keep in mind is that the funds that you're describing, soft money, such as fundraising, we by our own policy, we don't want to have a teacher's permanent contract hinge on that soft money. So we do not allow a teacher's contract to be paid from soft.
Good, thank you.
yeah.
That is huge that you point that out. Thanks.
Very good. Wonderful. I'll invite my the elementary director colleagues up here to continue with the presentation.
Thank you. If you can't hear me in any way, please indicate and I can remove my mask. But my name is Mike Douglas, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to speak to you tonight. The next slide, if you could, Steve. This is an actual FTE plan, or full-time teacher equivalent plan, for one of our schools for next school year. And as you can see, small schools do not equate to small classes. So this is a staffing plan for next school year for Twin Peaks Elementary. As you can see, their total projected enrollment is 201 students. The staffing ratio that's given to us by the state is 27.25. So for every 27.25 students that are enrolled, the school qualifies for one full-time teacher equivalent, or FTE. And as you can see, 201 divided by 27.25 gives us 7 teachers for Twin Peaks next year. And then I'm just going to go through the plan. So the grade level kindergarten, we have 27 kindergarten students. A 0.5 or half of a teacher will be allocated to kindergarten, and the other half will be paid out of our optional extended kindergarten grant that we have a partnership with the state of Utah. So when we say OEK, that's grant money. That will pay for the other half of the teacher. There will be 27 kindergartners in that class. First grade, we'll have 34 students in the first grade. For half of the day, there'll be 34 students, but we have a 0.5 FTE we can put there, and that will reduce the class sizes to 17 for half of the day. When the teacher goes home at lunch, that first grade class size will go back up to 34. Second grade, 33 students. There's only one FTE to give there, so that's a pretty large first grade class. Third grade, 33. Fourth grade, 37 students. Fifth grade, 37 students. As you know, the 27.25 would be considered an average class size based on our FTE ratio. These class sizes are substantially higher than that. The one thing I wanted to explain is in the green, the plan for the school was to have one full-time teacher support 4 different grade levels during the day for less than 2 hours per day. So that's what that green means. So they wouldn't be assigned a class per se, but they would push in or pull out for 4 different grade levels. This is
Nicole, do you have a question?
Oh, I just was gonna say, and the other thing to keep in mind is that if that doesn't go up before October 1st, if there's any kids that move in during the school year, that could be up to 40 kids in 5th grade and 4th grade.
that is correct.
That is the only place they can put that. Now, at that point, they could take that extra teacher and split it, but every kid that comes in will go into that grade and increase that level.
And the opposite is also a problem. What happens if 15 kids don't show up in the fall and they need to cut half a teacher?
Yes, both are true. Sometimes you're saying, we want new students, but please don't be a 5th grader. And then that just happens to be the year when you get 10 5th graders for some random event in the universe, and it makes things challenging. Sorry.
Can I ask a general question on the 7 FTE that's calculated from the 27.25? That's a little bit greater than 7. So where does the 0.4 go that is technically part? How does that get allocated across the district or the network or where?
Yeah, in the 27.25, that's a number that's actually established by the district. We set that. When I say we set that, this group sets that. We've not increased nor lowered class size in many, many years. And so really when we get new money, one of the things we try to do is protect the staffing ratio. In negotiations years ago, we call them fractionals, the fractionals. In the elementary, the decision was made through negotiations with the teachers many years ago that we would round down to the nearest 0.5 in elementary schools. And that captured all of those fractionals and put them onto the salary schedule. So the fractionals help fund the salary schedule.
Thank you.
Just wanted to let you know that we will be sharing a lot of qualitative data with you in the next few slides tonight that I think will help answer and paint a broader picture for you. This is not an ideal plan. This is not an ideal scenario. It can be very challenging. And my colleagues are going to share some concerns about what can happen with the smaller school, but all of the concerns that they share would become a reality in this scenario. So I want you to think about the fact that we do have schools, and it can be even compounded with a dual language immersion program. And if there's any questions for me, I'm going to turn the time over to my colleague, John Adams.
First of all, board, thank you so much for all of your support to our schools during the pandemic and every year. You do incredible work and we are so grateful for you, especially this year. So the portion that I have to go over is small school effects on students. Classes are often at or over capacity, and split classes of 2 or more grades are often needed, causing students to receive less support. Schools with specialized programs, such as dual immersion, have unique challenges related to class size. And I just wanted to give you an example. We do have one school that is a dual immersion school. In 4th grade, the dual immersion class has 20 students, and the class next door that does not have dual immersion students has 38. And so it's a big difference. Split classes make it more difficult to be attentive and aren't ideal for age level development. Case in point, schools that have large class sizes, the teacher is having to create lesson plans. They're having to differentiate. They're having to use proficiency-based learning to meet the needs of all of our students. And if it's a split class, that teacher may have to be prepared for 4th grade curriculum, for example, and 5th grade curriculum. And that just puts a lot of pressure on that teacher. Case in point, if we had Rick, who is our 3rd grade teacher, and maybe Dawn is the 5th grade teacher, Rick is going to have to pay attention to, for example, his 5th grade curriculum, while the other students have to work independently and receive less support. So they have to be motivated. They have to be on task, and that causes concerns as well. There are fewer opportunities for students to receive differentiated instruction for reteach, extension, and small group. And this again is due to large class sizes or split classes. Fewer classrooms limit inclusion opportunities for students with special needs. Example, some of our small schools, they may only have a part-time special ed teacher. We want our regular ed teacher and our special ed teacher to work together to meet the needs of all of our students. In an ideal situation, we're going to ask a resource teacher maybe to push in to support our special needs students. With small schools, this opportunity is less. Fewer classrooms inhibit the ability to separate students with behavior concerns, causing disruption to the learning environment and taking time away from learning. Once in a while, we'll get parents who call us and they'll state, we want a class change because maybe Johnny doesn't get along with, let's say, Natalie. And if we don't have classes to put the other student in, that causes concerns. And so the teacher is having to deal with behavior concerns, and this could lead to taking time away from learning. Social emotional needs are less likely to be met consistently. Some of our schools may only have a social worker 1 day a week and maybe a psych a half a day. But we know that students have needs, both social and emotional and behavior, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. We can't wait for the social worker to be there on a Tuesday, for example, to meet those needs. Extracurricular opportunities are limited due to inadequate resources. So we have fewer staff members at some of our schools, and we have great volunteers, and we so appreciate our volunteers, but maybe they are focusing all of their time on community council and PTA. Thus, that takes away for after-school opportunities. So that was my portion on small school effects on students. That's why we got into the business of education. We love our students. We need to support them. And questions from Julie.
Yeah, Mike, can you explain the special needs
John
issue again?
Adams.
Oh, you're John.
Yes.
And you're Mike. Oh,
He's
such
the
a
other
rookie
one.
newbie. I apologize.
You're fine.
Okay, could you explain the special needs scenario again? I'm not sure I quite understand that.
Okay, so for example, let's say that we have a 4th grade class And Aaron is the regular fourth grade teacher, and Dawn is the special ed teacher. Dawn may be assigned to her school just half time or part-time. So Dawn may be there at our school Monday and Wednesday. Students have needs Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. We want to give every opportunity to our students to be included. We want Aaron and Dawn to work together. When maybe Dawn's not there, he can't push into the classroom to give those extra supports for the special needs student. And so they still will receive inclusion, but it might not happen every day, and it may not be as strong as it could be with more resources in our school. Any other questions? Clark?
Yeah, I have a couple
Sure.
maybe that are layered. Can you tell me, do you have any data that would demonstrate that a split class ultimately performs or achieves at a lower level than a non-split class?
So I do have qualitative data. Teachers have reached out to me that have done split classes, and I have done a split class myself. The data that I can offer today is it does take a lot more time to plan and prep. And we're doing proficiency-based learning, which is a great program, but that takes time for me to differentiate maybe assessments for the student. And it takes away time from, other students. So if I, for example, am doing a split level and I'm teaching my 5th grade students, the 4th grade students are going to have to be self-motivated, have to work independently. And so the qualitative data is from real experience and also from teachers that I've talked about.
Okay. So I'm a product of a split class when I was in the 4th grade, so I'm not sure what that says about me, but my other question.
Me
and
too,
it kind of along the same vein is, I appreciate the qualitative nature of the data. Can you explain to me how it was gathered? Is it simply, this is what I hear, these are the complaints that I receive?
So the
Help
best
me
part of
understand
my,
that collection process.
Sure. The best part of my job is being visible in schools. And so I'm in classrooms often. I was in a couple today, and I hear comments from teachers. I hear comments from parents. So the parents will call me and they'll say they may have to spend extra time with their students because they're in a split class after hours. A lot of our parents, well, all of our parents are great, that we want the best interest of our students, but maybe they don't have the resources to provide a tutor, to provide that extra support for the student. Or maybe they just don't have the time because they're working 2 or 3 jobs. And so the data that I hear is from teachers, from administrators, and from parents mainly. And then also observing the classrooms, I see it firsthand, and our teachers are doing a great job, but maybe they have to spend more time with this small group that is perhaps below proficiency. And the extension students sometimes go without that extra support for extension learning opportunities. All right, well, thank you for your time, and Shauna Jensen is up next.
All right, we're going to talk now about small school effects that may happen with patrons and with families. A lot of them are very similar to what John was just explaining. Some of them bleed over into the families as well. One area is that parents may not have much choice on teachers or what class they want their children to be in. We all know we're living in a time of choice. There's lots of choice and options for parents, and we want to keep our students and our families here in our Granite schools. And when we're in a small school, you may have 2 teachers on that grade level. One might be one that's excellent with relationships or kind of the warm fuzzy teacher, while the other one might be more of a structured, firm teacher. Parents can't always have that choice of which one they want to be in, because regardless of the school, whether it's a small, medium, or large, we have to balance classes. Whether it's, but we do have to balance classes for academics, for social and emotional needs, and for behavioral needs. You can't put all of the children that have social emotional needs in one class and then put all the high achieving kids in another class, for example. And that's often what happens when we have a split. I also have taught several split classes. I used to teach several third and fourth grade split classes at a small school. And I spent much of my time instructing, not a lot of time then to work with individual needs and so forth. So we've got to balance the classes, and we want to allow choice for parents of what type of environment, a learning environment they need for their students. Sometimes, as John mentioned, we have students that maybe don't get along very well, or they are struggling, and putting them all in the same classroom makes a very difficult situation and often disrupts the learning for other students in that classroom. We've even had families who sometimes don't get along, and putting their children in the same classroom has caused problems. Some parents have shared frustration that students will receive less differentiated instruction as when they have a really large class size, like the 37 or the 33 in first grade. And then also with the split classes, as I mentioned before, teaching a split, I at one time had 4 different math groups with my third and fourth graders. And you can imagine how much time each group got and how individualized I couldn't get to, because I was trying to differentiate with the small groups, but then I couldn't answer questions for kids who are working independently and such at that time. Also, we sometimes in small schools have less time, have less parents to choose from, or who are willing to be involved in our community councils or in our PTA. Less parents means less opportunities for them to serve, less people to have serving on those councils and such, and maybe they often have to be on both the PTA and the community council, and sometimes they get a little bit burnt out or can't do their best because they're trying to serve on too many things. Questions about parents and families?
I just have a quick question. I missed your name and your specific role on the team. I apologize.
Oh, sorry, Shauna Jensen, and I'm a school leadership and improvement director. I supervise 12 elementary schools and principals.
And that's the same position for the 4 of you.
Yes, and Natalie's here too. Yeah, there's 5 of us, and so I'm one of the 5.
Yeah, hello, everyone. I'm Natalie Hanson. I am happy to be here and to share some information with you. And before I begin, I just want to thank you for your service and time that you are providing for our students and our teachers to Granite School District. It's very much appreciated. With small schools, there are effects not only on the students and families, but also the teachers. Fewer staff members make it difficult to carry out non-classroom duties and assignments. Some of these are listed as recess, bus duty, teams, committees, and extracurricular activities, causing teachers to serve in multiple positions. So many of these listed here are things to help keep our students safe. And we must have these people, especially like bus duty and recess duty. And then some of them are things, committees to help plan for upcoming events and ways we're gonna instruct regarding the curriculum. So there are all these other things beyond just teaching a class. Fewer teachers per grade level creates a challenge for effective PLC work. And for those of you that may not know what PLC is, that is professional learning communities, which is teachers getting together most of the time, either by grade level, by subject, by cross grade level groups, but it's them getting together to discuss curriculum, data that's come out, could be planning lessons together, coming up with assessments, all of that. And it's hard to do on your own. So it's nice when you have a team that you can work with on that. Fewer classes to distribute challenging students means teachers have multiple hard students in a single class, which can be more disruptive to the classroom environment and instruction. So again, when you have, 4 third grade teachers and there's a few kids that are causing disruptions, you have a place where you can distribute them out and it'll be distributed evenly. But if you're on your own or just you and one other person, there's not a lot of options except maybe another grade level. Teachers splitting classes means having to plan, prepare, and deliver instruction for 2 or more classes at the same time, which John spoke about. This leads to fewer individualized extensions and reteaching opportunities. So those are just a few things that there are others I'm sure we could come up with that teachers are experiencing at these small schools. Any questions? Okay, well, thank you for your time.
Hello, it's good to see everyone again. I do not have the same problem Aaron has. In fact, just the opposite. You might need to lower it. This by design, you've heard me talk about these things in community meetings and our board meetings in different ways and PowerPoints about small school concerns for a while. So this was by design, not my presentation. I really wanted you to hear from the people that are dealing with this day in and day out, from our elementary directors and also Aaron, all of which are former principals and teachers that are working and dealing with these things, hearing from principals, students, patrons, our parents, and a few of you. Clark, you've experienced it yourself in a split class, as have a lot of us. We really, again, this is not about, I could probably spend hours and hours and if not days on this. There is plenty of research on this, but like a lot of research topics in education, you're not often looking at apples to apples comparisons. I know Superintendent mentioned earlier that if you're in Virginia or New York or California or any other state, and sometimes if any other district, we all have to be careful about comparing like to like. But what we're confident in, I think these guys are confident in, is that this is a challenge. So there's no perfect answer. Are there some small schools that have been successful? Sure. But we have seen this enough to know that we feel like this is a challenge for us. So at this point, I'll be glad to go back over all these, but this is the same slide I've been using for years. And this is just a summary of everything you've just heard. I think 1 or 2 things at the bottom weren't mentioned, but I'll be glad to answer any questions. If discussion, we'll open it up. If we bring anybody up that we need to, that's the expert on these issues, then let's go to that point.
I guess if I may, the question I have is, we've heard from your perspective and you've detailed out many challenges related to small schools. What would the proponents of small schools say in rebuttal, if you will? How would they counter these bullet points that you have here?
Some of the things we hear quite often are, well, first of all, that's why we started with trying to define what we think a small school is. It's not always, in fact, it's often not about the total enrollment, but about the teachers, number of teachers per grade level. We've discussed that over and over. But what's typical is to say, hey, we like our small community. We're a neighborhood. There's only a handful of us. I know all their names. And those things are true. But typically, those things don't outweigh all of the other challenges that come with a small school. There are, again, if you're in some states and the per pupil spending is $12,000 per student, there are some ways to fix and adapt some of those issues in small schools. But again, for us and our state and our district, that's where we're at. But Directors, you want to offer any? What do you hear? Some people say, hey, small schools are great.
You mentioned that it's the community feel, the principal, you know, the students by name, but that could happen in any other school that it does. Those are the two main things that I've heard that are benefits.
And if I can even further focus my question, I understand the community issue. Is there anything from an educational advantage standpoint that those proponents would specifically argue?
I think if the class sizes worked out evenly, you know, like, oh, we have like 20, 25 in each class, you know, and we've got 2 teachers per grade level, that maybe could be great, but it doesn't usually happen that way. And I think there's a, you know, misconception that small school, you know, that everyone will you'll still have all the same programs, but sometimes you can't run those programs. So, you know, I think it doesn't always work out perfectly, but if it would, I guess, you know.
Yeah, that's my question is, usually those who are proponents that you've heard from maybe throughout the country or whatever, what are the class sizes of those that are proponents of small classes usually? Is that data ever shown or shared?
Are you asking if we've had conversations with proponents of small schools?
Yeah, I'd like to know, are those proponents usually coming from schools that have small class sizes like 20 to 25? We've seen those schools and I agree, that's great, but do they have to deal with large class sizes like we do?
So I personally have never had a conversation with someone that's a proponent of a small school. I have conversations with people who struggle with small schools in our district or neighboring districts. I can't speak to what they may or may not say.
If we have a school that has classes of 20 to 25, that's going to be in some grades, but the other grades have to make up that balance and we'll have larger classes for the ratio of the 27.25.
And they have less resources, so they may need a full-time, let's say, resource teacher. But they're using their money to buy an additional FTE to keep those class sizes lower. And so something, you know, some program is going to go without or less than what it could be.
Is that good? Okay, we have a question from Julie, a question from Chris, and then Nicole. Let's go in that order.
I just wanted to tell you, Terry, that the research that I've read about this is it just shows growth. Like there was a baseline regardless of where they're, what grade, how many kids were in their grade. Did they grow when they were in a smaller class versus not a smaller class, a smaller school with the same amount of kids in the class? So that's what most studies will show, like everything else equal, the only thing that changed was how small or how big the school is, how many teachers were in the school. That's what they'll usually look at because they want to compare apples to apples as much as they can, you know. But you know, so as a teacher of kids who had not been successful in their schools at an alternative high school, much of what we tried to do to address our students' needs was to make the school as small as possible. And it's an alternative school, so you did get to have smaller class sizes, but it was also about making it so that there were less teachers who you were interfacing with, so that you felt like you were a part of something. And as soon as they felt like they were a part of something and like all the teachers knew them, it changed the way they felt about school. And that's on a high school level, but remember that the problem happened for them in elementary. That created the problem for them in high school. And so this effort to constantly make schools as small as possible so that kids felt a part of something and didn't feel like they were just one in, you know, a whole bunch of faceless crowd
We chose to do that based on data that we found from research and from looking. And I think it's important that I agree that we see these things, that we need to make sure we know what's going on in our own schools, and then we respond to those things. But it doesn't mean that we can't learn from other schools, even though they're different from us, right? We can still go and look and see what they're doing, and then look and see how that would adapt to what we're doing here. So with all of that commentary coming from me, I guess what I want to know is, I want to see, how do small schools affect students in positive ways? And how do they affect patrons and parents in positive ways? And how do they affect teachers in positive ways? Because one thing we need to know is, if we choose not to pursue small schools in our district, we need to recognize what we're giving up. You know, we need to know what we're sacrificing and how that is outweighed by the gains that we will see from removing these problems, I think. And the last thing that I would love to just have a comment on is, there's a part of me that worries that if we close schools and we fill them up, then it's like closing off the opportunity to ever make lower class sizes. Because if you make lower class sizes, now you don't have a room to put a new class in. You know, it almost just cancels out the opportunity and gives in to the fight. And I know that's a really unrealistic battle that I'm fighting, but darn it, somebody's got to fight it still. We can't just sit around and not fight it also. So I mean, I'm kind of balancing my idealism and realism on that issue.
All right, thanks, Julie. Chris? So my question is, do we have some kind of rubric or whatever for our lower grades? Because that's huge for a lower grade class to have that many kids. I don't even think how they could learn in a kindergarten class with that many. Do we have a minimum, like, have we ever set a limit on our kindergarten, first or second grade classes so that we can kind of balance some of that?
We have recommendations. I want to say 22 in first and second, 24 in third and fourth, and then fifth and sixth need to catch up, you know, pick up the rest to get to the staffing ratio. But as you saw, if you look back at that Twin Peaks, they're just not able to do that. You're able to do that the larger your school is, because then you can shuffle FTE around. But when you're that constrained, that's what small schools put constraints on flexibility. And that's the management problem. I'll look at the five of you. You each supervise 12, 13 elementary schools. Anybody 14? You're all 12 now? Okay. And you've done it for years. Have you ever had an elementary principal say to you, now, they're not primed for this, okay? They don't know, they're going, oh, what's he about to ask us? Have you ever, give it to Tina. Have you ever had an elementary
Better be
principal
on
say,
your toes.
you know what, if we had 100 more kids, think of what we could do. As opposed to, have you ever had an elementary principal say to you, you know, if we had 100 fewer kids, things would really be nice.
So when I was a first-year principal at Mill Creek Elementary, which was a very small school, Ernie Broderick was at Stansbury Elementary, which was at one of the largest schools in our district. And he said to me at the FTE meeting, he said, I will take my large school problems any day over your small school FTE. And I really didn't understand what that meant until I started putting that together at my school. And I could not divide the students up equally to make the teachers happy, had to have a split, which then brought about the parent complaints, et cetera. So if I could have had 100 more students at that moment, it would have made my life very much easier.
Now, I was the 3 years a teacher and 2 years an administrator at the alternative high school in Provo School District. And we worked really hard. We had about 250 kids, and we worked really hard to make sure everyone was attached to an adult and everybody knew everybody's name. And that really made a difference for those kids. But we were heavily subsidized to be able to do that. And that's, we've very deliberately not talked about money tonight, There are small schools in terms of fixed costs are they're prohibitively expensive. But that wasn't what we wanted to talk about tonight. We wanted to talk about pedagogy and these kinds of impacts rather than getting caught on the money. But that's perhaps a discussion for another time. I hear what Julie's asking, and I think that's fair.
We will talk about fixed costs the costs eventually, because I think it's a really important conversation, right?
Yeah, we're not prepared to talk about that tonight.
Yeah, that's fine.
But if we were to collect a list of the positives, and I think you said that a moment ago, I've never had anybody advocate for, and I think that gets hard.
So I did have a principal of a very small school say to me, we have a family feel here. It's a small community, but their data is not very good. So if you want quantitative data, if you look at just their test results, it's not very good, but they feel like it's a small community, small staff. They feel good about their culture of their school. We know the students, that we know the parents, but I'm telling you, it doesn't translate to the quantitative data.
Before Julie, we've got to get to Nicole. So we have.
I need to respond to that quick.
Oh, okay.
Just an idea is that we have a few small schools in our district who are doing really well. It'd be interesting to ask those principals, what is working here? Why is this working in this small school? Because everywhere else it says it shouldn't be working. So why is it working here? I'd be interested to know that.
Well, I think the answer to that, Julie, sorry, but to me, it's obvious. It's so socioeconomic. Because when you have parents, that's part of that slide. When you have parents that are involved.
Do you want to pull down your mic a little bit, Nicole? There you
There are
go.
studies, do I have to eat it? There are studies that say that. There was a study that came out of, I've quoted it before, that came out of UC Irvine and BYU and UNC or something like that, where they said the number one factor in a kid succeeding is parent involvement. Well, where do we have more parent involvement? Let's think about that. So, well, yes, small schools can succeed. We know that because they have parents that are there supporting them, that are there to be on the school community council, to staff the PTA, because they have parents who are available and are willing to do that. But we don't have that across the board. And that's the thing, is that we have a large district that has a very diverse, we're very diverse. So, I mean, I think there's an answer to your question there, Julie, that there's a reason, and that's probably a big part of that reason. I just was gonna say, we do have to talk about, I mean, and it is a discussion for another night, but we have a fiscal responsibility, and it costs the same to run a school, whether it has 200 kids in it or pretty much, I don't know, maybe Don can chime in on that, but it costs almost the same to run a school with 200 kids in it versus 600 kids in it. So we have a fiscal responsibility to our patrons, to our constituency. So we can't ignore that. But we don't ever want to say, well, we're not going to do a small school just because of the financial responsibility. I get that. But there is something that is part of it. But I don't know, Steve, because I know you've had experience. Why is this different? Because we're talking about elementaries. We do have some small junior highs. Why is this not equally balanced out with the junior highs? Well, it doesn't apply to any of our high schools, but why do we not see this impact in a junior high?
It can be. I mean, again, you were at Churchill with me when it could be really a challenge. In fact, it was a challenge at Churchill, and we got down below a certain threshold. We know that in secondaries, especially in junior highs, if you get really start below 600, but especially 500, you can't have the offerings. And then when you don't have the offerings to satisfy the students and the parents, people leave. And that becomes a spiral that's very, very difficult to get out of. And so why are we having this conversation for elementaries? I mean, that is our focus right now. We don't have any high schools that we have some high schools that are smaller to pretty dang large, but not to the point of our elementary schools.
Go ahead, Chris.
But
This is kind of financial too. Dr. Bates just said that we changed we voted on the FTE several years ago or whatever. Is that is that something set in stone for a long time? Or is that something we can look at? Because to me, that would solve a little bit of this maybe, is if we had a little bit different rubric for that, but.
Lowering class size by a student. So going from 27.25 to 26.25 to lower by one district-wide is about a $9 million price tag. You know what? It might be higher than that. It's a big number. And so we've sometimes moved, the last time we moved a quarter up. Anything a quarter. So we went from 27 in the junior highs and the elementaries to 27 and a quarter, and from 28 in the high school to 28 and a quarter. We did that. That's been a number of years ago. Raised a lot of money moving just by a 0.25. And you think, well, 0.25 more kids per class, that doesn't seem like much, but that adds, you feel that, and especially you feel that in a secondary school where class size and staffing ratio are disconnected by a multiplier. So the 28.25 staffing ratio in high school translates into an average of 37.7 student class size because of the way consultation periods pull kids out and have to be redistributed elsewhere. So there's a lot of money in raising class size, but nobody wants to do that because of how that compounds, and it costs a lot to lower class size. So once we've moved it, we try really hard to not move it. Again, but can the board do that? Absolutely. You have the ability to do that.
Julie. I think too that I just want to make sure I'm right on this. If you decided that you're going to keep a small school open because they were doing really well, you'd be paying more money into that school, which means that you're being inequitable. Is that true? Right? I mean, I got that right?
Inequitable as in,
Well, now
I
you're
just wanna make sure I'm
putting more money into this smaller group of kids rather than, right? So that's an issue that we're gonna.
if there's a subsidy to the FTE, absolutely. Right. There's a different question there, getting back to kind of what Nicole said, and we're not getting into the weeds there, but yeah, there's fiscal responsibility. But yes, to answer your question, it takes a subsidy oftentimes to maintain a small school.
Which we are subsidizing our small schools. Okay. And also, can you just address how this affects dual language, dual DLI schools? I mean, 3 is not the number there, it's 4, isn't it? They need to be a little bigger.
That's correct. And I'll invite directors to fill in, but let me just say in general, yes, DLI is almost a separate category, because if you have, for instance, let's say you have 4 teachers per grade level, which we love. However, if that's DLI and 2 of those per grade level already DLI, well, in essence, you're almost running 2 schools. You got your 2 DLI in 4th grade and your 2 regular ed, we'll call it, in 4th grade, but you have the same issues that you would have in a school with 2 teachers per grade level in most ways. If you guys want to add to that, please do.
Yeah, 3 of my 12 schools are dual immersion schools. 2 of them are small dual immersion schools. One of the examples that John shared earlier about the class that had 20 students in the dual language program, and right next door, there were 38 kids. That was 1 grade. That was a 4th grade class. The 5th grade class, same scenario. I think there were just a couple less 5th graders, so it was maybe 32 kids. But it becomes an inequity. It's inequitable too, because it then becomes kind of the haves and the have-nots. Those kids that are in that special program, and they start out with 30 or 32 in the 1st grade, but by the time they move and attrition and such, by the time they get to the upper grades, there aren't as many kids. Somebody suffers. Somebody suffers in those classes, in those schools.
We often see DLI schools accepting special permits a lot more than their other schools because they know they're trying to build that up so that they can even things out. Again, it really comes down to a basic economy of scale for those things to try to even those inequities out.
Early on as dual language came to the state, there were a number of schools that jumped onto the DLI wagon wanting to bolster their enrollment because they felt their enrollment going down. And that had over time significant negative impacts in the community. And I don't even want to say the school names out loud. We can talk about that later if you'd like. But at this point, I'd be hard pressed to put a dual language program into a school that didn't have already 4 teachers per grade level, so that adding those 2 would bring them up to 6, simply
Correct.
because of the community impact. And you may be aware of some of those in your own community.
And I've talked to principals that have said the exact same thing, superintendent, is, hey, we keep getting requests in our community council and from patrons to add dual, but we can't do that here. We're too small. It just won't work.
They often have said, at least to me, that it's like running 2 small schools because you're
Yes.
running 2 teachers per grade level within the school. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions, board members, and thank you guys for being here tonight to field all those questions and present.
It's our pleasure. Thank you.
We talked some time ago, might have been 2 weeks, might have been 2 months. They're running together for me about some opportunities for next year. And we indicated that under the CARES Act, CARES is the big name for the whole package. ESSER is the school piece of CARES. So when we talk about the ESSER plan, we're talking about the federal funds that come to help schools. So Rick, you're up.
Thank you, board member, superintendent. Just have a few slides for you and information on ESSER, which is the Elementary and Secondary Emergency Relief Act. That is coming from federal legislation, and we've had 2 rounds of federal monies allocated out to schools. We had one right after COVID hit towards late March of last year, and that's where we get our ESSER acronym. And the second round went through federal legislation in December, which we're calling ESSER 2. Both interesting to me. Sometimes we'll call one CARES 1 and CARES 2, but they actually have different acronyms. ESSER 2 is what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about the second round of federal monies that have been distributed out to states. The intent of this
Can
money.
you say one more time what Esther sent? Oh, there it is. Never mind. Go ahead.
I need
Carry on.
to practice it. Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. Intent of that money from the federal government is to help local education agencies safely reopen schools, measure and effectively address learning loss, and take any other actions to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on students and families who depend on K-12 schools. So pretty broad intent. And all COVID related. This grant comes to USBE, so it comes to the state. The state will then distributes that money out to each LEA or school district, charter school, et cetera. The formula they're using for that allocation is a Title I proportion. So Granite is the largest recipient of this money. Granite will receive $43 million. The next closest is actually the largest school district in the state, Alpine, but receiving 27 million.
Granite has about 10% of the students in the state, but we get 20% of the Title I money, and so about 20% of this money, which speaks to the ratio of poverty that we have and the service that Granite School District provides the students in need in the state of Utah.
That's correct. We by far will receive the largest portion of this funding due to our Title I allocation.
I want to hit the allowable uses really quick with you so you're aware, and I'll just read through those. Providing principals and other school leaders resources to address location needs. I actually smile at this one because that is extremely broad allowable use and probably is the broadest out of any of the other bullets you'll see. Supplemental after-school programs, summer classroom and distance learning, activities to address unique needs of vulnerable student populations. Address learning loss, and they break that down into assessment, learning activities, parent support, attendance and disengagement. Tracking student attendance and improving student engagement in distance learning. So they do break out distance learning in that. Allowable use is at-risk individual student plans, and don't really get too prescriptive in any of these. These are somewhat broad, and we're allowed some latitude on how we're going to translate that and actually execute on plans for that. Purchasing educational technology, hardware, software, and connectivity that aids interaction between teacher and student. We're happy about that allowable use because it gives us a lot of options and a lot of flexibility with the funding. Providing mental health supports, and again, quite broad, a lot of options there. Developing and implementing procedures and systems to improve preparedness and response in the LEA. Purchasing and supplies to sanitize and clean. We used ESSER 1 funds significantly in that realm as we got rolling this year. Training on sanitation and minimizing spread of infections and diseases. So all quite broad and a lot of opportunity for us. They do name 3 non-allowable uses, and those are subsidizing or offsetting executive salaries and benefits of individuals who are not employees of the LEA, expenditures related to state or local teacher, faculty unions or associations, and ESSER 2 funds will generally not be used for bonuses, merit pay, or similar expenditures. Knowing all of these, the grant and the funding we have is due at the end of March. So we have started to work on, okay, we know the funding, we know the allowable uses. Now let's start thinking through some projects that we want to make happen. Julie.
Yeah, the first bullet there, does that mean that we can't contract services?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So projects that we've discussed, and I'm not prepared to get too far on this because quite honestly, we had just got the rule set to us and are starting to formulate what these projects are going to be and look like.
Let me emphasize something. Connect 2 dots that Rick just threw out there. The one is that we just got this, and the second dot is that it's due in 2 weeks. So that's not atypical. Okay, don't want to throw anybody under the proverbial school bus. Gratefully, the plan, what's required by the state, correct me if I misspeak, Rick, is fairly general.
Yes. In fairness to USBE, the learning of it and the timeline is short, but it is not very specific, detailed types of response that they're asking for. Thank you, Superintendent. So our projects, and this is the one that connects back to 2 weeks ago and talking about Granted Online and offering synchronous. We plan to use some of the funding for our synchronous option and preventing teachers from having to teach in 2 modalities. So we're excited about having some funding to help us buffer and get through what we expect to be a group of students who would like to not have the face-to-face option and want to engage in synchronous in the fall. We're having talks around after-school supplemental programming and summer programming. These things aren't new for us, but they might be new on a larger scale. We have after-school programming and we have summer programming. So we're talking through what would that look like across the district rather than in specific schools. Typically, you'll see these types of programming happening with Title I schools and Title I funding used to make them happen. Elementary core content and support and secondary graduation support. We're fairly early in this talk, but there's 2 areas that seem to be focal points when it comes to learning loss and the sense of urgency, and they're kind of on the ends of the the K-12 spectrum. We're concerned about early literacy and numeracy with young students. And then we're concerned about graduation and credits for the students who are close to their senior year. Karen?
Can I just, so on the summer programming, and this could be too narrow and maybe you don't know yet, but summer programming is great for the students you can actually get to participate, but the kids that might need to participate might be very hard to convince that to come and do an educational this or that or the other. So are you looking as part of that little bullet point, and I don't necessarily need an answer on this today, but are you looking at how to engage the right kids who need that to be brought?
Yeah. The point you raise is what we're grappling with, and we don't have an answer for that. That's the challenge. I think it's real easy to throw out there, hey, just offer summer school and you're going to make up all the learning loss. But that's pretty naive to think that that's just going to do it. And we're having that very conversation
Okay.
around, a lot of things we can put a lot of things that we're going to do, but what is really going to work and what's going to be effective. I think most people go to increased duration, but that's a little bit of fool's gold. I think it can help, but there's also some other things that are part of the learning equation that we want to consider.
What is increased duration? What do you mean by that?
More days of school,
Oh, more
summer
days of
school, after school, go longer in the day.
Gotcha, okay.
Increased duration of time in the classroom.
I will point out, just to hit it again, I think Rick said this earlier, this money can be spent over the next 2 calendar years into 23. And so what might not be in place for this summer might, yes, be in place next summer.
Yes, and that was a bullet point, but I didn't speak to it. Thank you, Superintendent. That 43 million is over 2 years. So we're looking at, splitting that money in half and running programs for year 1 and 2 with the variation of having to maybe move as we learn what works and doesn't work.
To make sure everyone gets to speak, can we go Terry, Chris, Nicole? Are you guys good with that order?
Sure.
Go for
Yeah,
it.
thank you.
So how much of the ESSER one have we,
We've expended all of it.
did we have a time limit on that?
We did. We had to have that spent by January 1.
Because I keep hearing on the news how these funds haven't been spent, and I just didn't know which one they related. Ours have.
Yep, ours had, and that was primary. I'm gonna look to Don a little bit because Don was the facilitator over that first round. A lot of that went to PPE expenditure.
All schools then throughout the nation have a time limit?
They did, yes.
And keep in mind that the ESSER one money was substantially small. We're
Yeah.
talking $3-4 million worth of funds, not 43.
Yeah.
And so between digital learning outreach, buying some programs, the software to support online learning and PPE and training.
Don, it wasn't difficult.
And you did great. You
I
did
think $3
great.
million is a lot of money.
Right, Chris.
So my
Chris, yeah.
question kind of went around, is timing also. So when you talk about secondary graduation support, you're talking about this school year right now for secondary support, some of this money going towards?
Yep, we can start spending. The money can actually be backdated if need be for expenditures we've had even last fall. So yes, we can start using some of that money. Our plan is to get to principals in the April principals meeting, this information and probably a little bit more detailed framework to help them wrap their heads around, okay, here's your allocation. And here's ideas on what you can use that funding for, and here's how the supports that we will provide. We're going to take a big chunk of this and distribute it out to schools in a per pupil allocation.
Okay, because my concern is that, we have students right now that it's been a full year for them in the pandemic. And so I just want to make sure some of that money is going towards current, right now seniors, that are trying to finish up strong. So.
Yep, they'll have that opportunity. We expect schools to receive around the same amount of money that they're receiving in TSSA in our ESSER allocation to them.
Nicole.
So I guess along with that, I know we had asked before about, can they use that to pay for some of these seniors to do the credit recovery? Is that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think that the challenge with that, and going back to what Karen was saying too, usually the barrier is not expense to do credit recovery. We've learned that we're gonna make that easy for kids. It's the challenge of the dedication and fortitude that takes, and getting them there and removing other barriers and getting them some individualized attention that ends up usually being the expense.
I make one comment. I am all in favor of dedicating money right now to apparent and critical needs. But I'm also worried about what we don't know yet in terms of the impact and the fallout of the pandemic, and saving some of that money to address things that we're just not sure what's going to come out of our schools, or there are results that are going to come out in the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, agreed. And I think right now schools, because of the pandemic and some lower numbers in classes, et cetera, have a little more money than they typically would this time of year in TSSA, for example, or in land trust, for example. So I think even finishing out this year with some additional funding, they have some of that buffer there. Just because of the nature of the school year, the funding piece isn't necessarily the challenge for this year. It's going into next and discovering where we're sitting, where we're landing, who do we have, and where are they at.
Probably a dumb question, but I'm gonna.
There
ask
are
you.
no dumb questions, Terry.
So, you're concerned about motivating kids to, can any of this money be used to, as an incentive, pay them for completing? Because money motivates teenagers.
Yeah, oh, motivates humans. Yeah. I think in Granite's history, I think there's been some experimentation with that. I think there's some downsides. I think there's some ways to incentivize that maybe falls a little bit short of straight cash payment. But I think we're starting to talk with some creative incentivization of that, especially with teenagers and some of the older students.
Rick, go to the next page and finish out this list.
Family engagement is another project that we have under development. And again, these aren't new to us. It's just now we have funding to scale them even larger. Stipending for home visits, and then parent liaisons, increasing that in more than the schools that we currently have. Mental health, we're talking of lowering ratios of social workers, psychologists, and counselors throughout schools. The trick here is always a staffing trick, knowing that the funding's for 2 years, and we don't want any reduction in force. We want to always keep our people. And so we're just having to be cautious of not overloading it and then having to let people go in 2 years. We always want to be conscious of that, but we think we have some wiggle room to lower the ratios in those 3 areas.
That's kind of my question, is why, I mean, it's gonna be like ripping off a Band-Aid, I feel like, if we lower the ratio of social workers and we get used to, woo, a social worker in every school or whatever, and then all of a sudden it's gone. Do you feel like?
Yep. I think that's true of all the funding in general, whether it's summer programs, whether it's additional aids, whether it's trackers. I think that's something to be aware of, just like, sometimes it's going to feel great, but it's not going to be able to sustain and continue. So we want to be real conscious of how we put our strategies together.
And I think that is going to be the trick through this, because you don't want to, walk away from this money and not put extra supports over the 2 years. But then you do have to be conscious of what you both have mentioned. Taking that away is just going to feel like just a dagger to your heart, basically. I had a question just on the kind of submitting this plan within a couple weeks when it's due. What is the flexibility after it's submitted? So let's say we submit a plan and then we find out that, hey, this particular program is taking off, or, we need extra support in this particular area, which requires extra funding. Do we have a process to kind of amend our plan as we go forward? Because like to Clark's point, we can do our best thinking and our best strategy right now, but we don't know what we don't know yet. And so is there flexibility on the back end to kind of tweak this as we go on?
All indications from USBE is yes, a lot of flexibility. They're educators as well, and they know the complexity of this. And they're not looking to micromanage us. Again, it's a fairly open submission, and flexibility, I think, will be high.
I have one more question. Do we see, I realize I'm asking you to look in a crystal ball, but as far as purchasing supplies to sanitize and clean, do you feel like we're going to continue with the same? Is this our goal, to continue with the same type of sanitizing and cleaning regardless of what everything is? Is that going to be lightened at all? What's our thoughts on that?
Dawn? No, the amount of cleaning that we do today, as we've talked with people about, we've had a lot of conversations about what are good things that we've learned this year. And you've seen the same reports that we have, I'm sure. RSV is just about disappeared, and
Influenza too.
flu, I mean, all kinds of things that we've, and that's largely attributable to masks, hand washing, and the other cleaning that we've been doing. I don't know that we will have the ongoing budget over time to maintain the exact levels of cleaning that we are doing now, but I'll let Dawn speak to that a little bit.
I think from what we all learned during the pandemic and transferability, be it from touch to hands to face, et cetera, we came out really hard because there were enough unknowns that we needed to do what we needed to do. We will start to see come next school year a lessening of the cleaning. So maybe not as much in-class cleaning by teachers and students. The custodial staff will still need to keep up a very significant regimen. The supplies to sanitize, et cetera, they're still important. I think they're also important for maintaining trust by the public, trust from the teachers, et cetera. So we cannot operate like it was 2018. We may not operate like it was 2020. There will be a balance. And that is reflected in Rick's plan numbers that for the next 2 years, my recollection is it's 2 some odd million, not the 4 million in 1 year. So you will start to see, kind of a right sizing of the cleaning.
Along with that, what about the filters, the air filters? Are we going to ramp that down, or do you feel like that's important enough? What are your thoughts on that?
From an ESSER 2 standpoint, there was a point made in terms of facilities that the federal government had allowed for filtering to be paid out of ESSER 2. The state legislative version does not allow for that, or for repairs or upgrades to facilities, just supplies.
We're not allowed to do that. And I think that's probably, from my department standpoint, the worst thing that could have happened. We really did like the results we were seeing. So it was very disappointing to have that ratcheted back from us.
Do you want to talk
Julie,
more about that?
I'm just processing that. Go ahead, Julie.
So Rick, I just want to make sure I'm not misconceiving what you said earlier. I think the district we as a district are going to do a few programs, but then we're going to try to push the majority of this money into the principal's hands. Is that correct?
Correct. Now, with a caveat that we'll make principals aware of the allowable uses and build essentially a menu for them of things that can and should be considered, but allow them the options, flexibility based on their location and their needs to make the decisions on how they want to use their allocation.
Yeah, this is kind of reminding me of a land trust plan. Don't you think? Similar?
PSSA Land Trust has similar structures.
Yeah.
Yeah, allocated as a PPA with a framework to operate in.
Well, I just want to comment that I really appreciate that is our strategy in Granite, because I think the closer that money gets to a student, the better it's going to be spent. And the idea that the leadership here would recognize and put that kind of trust in their principals, I think says a lot about our leadership. That you guys don't act like you know everything, but that you trust the people who are in the school. I just like am bubbling with joy that that is the attitude. And I think at the same time, I know that you guys will also support, like give them as much support as they need to spend it in ways that are responsible and effective. Effective is the word I mean to use. So I just applaud you and really respect that decision making.
Good point, Julie. Any other questions, concerns? I appreciate the work that you and your teams, have put into this and, a 2-week turnaround, that's a tall order, but we know you guys are up to the task. So thanks for taking that on. These are great categories to focus on. So
Actually, can I add one more thing?
Sure.
To my comments? Will you guys also make sure that, I think it goes without saying, but maybe a little encouragement to your principals to remind them that in the midst of all of this stress, they also will do better if they seek feedback from students, parents, and teachers. They already know that, but just a little reminder, I think, will go a long way, especially listening to students, because I don't think we always do that, but I think they will offer a perspective that's going to be really valuable, even on the elementary level.
Yes, will do.
thanks, Rick.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Can we take a 5-minute break as we, before stretch our legs, and then we'll come back and have our Westlake discussion?
Don't be looking at that clock, because it's not moving.
I looked at that clock 5 times.
I keep looking at it too.
Okay. All right, welcome back, everybody. We're just going to jump right back into our agenda. Turn the time over to Don to talk about Westlake Junior.
About a year ago, something happened that shook all of our lives. I'm sorry, go ahead, Don.
No, that was my opening line.
Be here all
so
night.
363 days ago. So on the 18th, it'll be a year. At 7:57 a.m., I sent out a text to the superintendency that simply said earthquake with a bunch of exclamation points behind it. And that started our day.
In point of fact, we were already aware.
So in tonight's discussion, we have some board members that have been along for the entire ride, and we have some new board members. I tried to set the stage in your packet by sending along, most importantly, kind of some of the images from that week. And what I want to know is, do you want to bring that up and go through it so I can explain some of this? Or do you feel that those images set the stage enough for you to understand the level of damage in the school? What would you like?
I think this, speaking only for myself, I think the stage has been set.
Okay, good. Then we will.
The stage has been set for me too, but I do feel like there might be members of the public who might like to see that, but I guess you know what, they can go and look at them. They're going to be posted, right, Ben?
Yep.
So-
Yeah, the full information was, and we did have a session, I want to say last November,
Yeah,
that went through
I
this
remember
process
that.
as well.
Yeah, so let's move forward.
Yeah, it's public and accessible.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so Stephen, let's switch quickly to the presentation. And tonight, what we really want to do is gain some direction on something that sounds very simple, but has a lot of moving parts to it. It's about either rehabilitating. Is it up, Steve? It's coming? Okay, thank you. It's about rehabilitating a building that was built in 1963, or and that rehabilitation comes with a structural code update. So we're required to get to 75% of current code as the allowable minimum in an old building when we do this. But there are some things that you would want to do in that school but are not triggered by code. And the easiest example is fire sprinklers, right? I mean, we'd want to do that. Is the air conditioning and heating a little weak? Yep, we probably want to do that. The electrical, well, it's built for a 1963 school, not necessarily for today's demands. And so those are some ads that may want to come up. But as we get going, we want to share what the structural engineers and architects tell us need to happen to that school. And I don't know where a clicker is at, Stephen. So I'll rely on you. I'll raise my hand, Stephen, and if you would change.
Just make the beep noise, remember?
Some of us know what it means to say, when Tinkerbell rings her little bell like this.
That's right. No,
Most of us.
I could rock a film strip too, so that's good. So in this floor plan of Westlake, the walls that need to be removed and replaced to gain structural integrity are in red. Those that can be braced are in green. So as you can tell, for the most part, we can reinforce some of the classroom wing exteriors. We would reinforce some auditorium walls. The gym was in horrible condition and actually bows out, and you can see the bowing from the outside. So we're really adding strength into this building. The shear strength disappeared because it's an unreinforced masonry building. And the minute it hit, and you saw in those pictures, all of those shock waves through our block, we have no shear in the building. So if another seismic event were to hit, we'd really struggle with that building. So there's a lot of interior walls that come out and get put back in. And then, of course, the entire roof structure would need to be redone and tied all together to keep everything heading towards some seismic stability. So it is a massive undertaking to rehabilitate this building. Keep in mind, while we have some very good consultants and took a lot of time and effort to get to this point, And sometimes we did destructive testing, meaning we would break stuff open to double check some theories. We are not positive that we have accounted for all of the damage and would only find that in the remodel itself. So if you've ever done anything in your homes, the more you dig into it, the worse it gets. That's words of wisdom to
Amen.
live by in Westlake.
Not going there.
So if we decide that we want to undertake the rehabilitate the structure option, insurance is with us along the way. So they are important that we have the cost estimates. But again, that warning, as we get into it, things get worse. Yeah, we're going to find stuff. And I fear we will get into a negotiation of change orders with the insurance company. We think that this needs to happen. Our structural engineers think this. They may have differing opinions. So there could be in this rehabilitation some give and take that make it a bit of a challenge, okay? But if we do this, we'll have a safe structure to the point of 75% of current code. The latest code revisions were in 2009. So we'll be equivalent to, I think, about a 1980s building, mid-80s in seismic performance. Post-rehab, the building would be very similar in layout and use as that 1963 design. They are just going to replace what's there today. We can't make, on their dime, massive changes. And again, I mentioned electrical, HVAC, fire sprinklers, and instructional technology that you would put into this building that would be at district cost. Okay, so we'll come back to those with numbers in a little bit. Go ahead. So when we were discussing in October and November, what we thought we could do, we were really thinking, hey, there needs to be more contingency in this. We would never come to you with this, I'm going to call it very high level schematic design and not say, hey, we really think it's going to be 10, 15% more than this, because the more you know, the more the costs go up. That's why contingencies are there until your bid day. So we wanted to approach the insurance company in negotiations and get some of these contingencies. We were somewhat successful because they did give us roughly 5.5% contingency. Mainly, they called it owner contingency. We still want a design contingency because, again, the more the design gets put together, the more a builder understands what they're really doing, the more the costs go up. And so Doug put together a lot of great negotiation points, sent some stuff away to them in December. They hummed and they're hawing, and at the end of the day, in February, I'm going to look at Doug, we got okay, we'll give you another $750,000. So we went from 36 million to 37 million. Yeah, we worked really hard for $750,000. And again, so from what we understand from some different advisors, attorneys that deal with insurance, brokers that deal with insurance, they said, wow, you guys got any contingency? That's pretty amazing. So that 5.5%, they thought was a win. We're disheartened about it because we don't think it gets us where we really should get. Meaning, if we rehabilitate, I'm sure the insurance company is going to pay more than $37.5 million for this rehab. There's not a doubt in my mind that they'll pay more. They're just not willing to settle for more. Okay, so let's continue through.
Hey, Don, can I ask you a quick question?
Yes,
I
ma'am.
don't know, maybe it's not quick. So if we did end up doing the rehab, would it ever get to the point where the insurance company would say, with everything that we find, would they ever say, okay, you're right, let's just scrap it and start over?
Not really, because just to get to that point, the demolition would cost them a substantial amount of money that they just wouldn't want to throw away. They would use the old term, in for a penny, in for a pound.
And by
and
the
so they-
time,
yeah.
by the time you got to maybe that point, they would have so much money already invested that they're not going to walk away from that.
Yeah, I think that that's very rare circumstance that they would ever walk away from that kind of money. Okay. And again, they don't really care about the end use. They care about their dollars invested, right? So to them, it's a number. To us, it's a school. So while as nice as they are as people, their business is about making money, not paying it out. Okay. So we decided that we're not going to get any further along in negotiations, and it's been a year, and we need to get this building going. So in essence, they offered another $792,000, bringing their settlement offer up to roughly $37.4 million. And we started our counteroffer at $44.6 million. Definitely wanted to get well over 40 in our settlement to bring the risk of building a new structure down, but we didn't get there. Next slide, please. That is the detail that was in your packet. Hopefully, it gives you an understanding of where we were and what they did to get us there, but it's not a meaningful contribution at the end of the day. Go ahead, Stephen. Okay. So in our debate, the real question is, what is a new school going to cost? So we reached out to some folks that had just completed West Jordan Elementary School, and we said, hey, yes.
Sorry,
Julie.
before you move on to that. So the bottom line is that you think that insurance will pay 37.4 million. You think it's really going to cost 44.6 million.
No, that was our counteroffer to them. We said, we want you to pay us 44.6.
Gotcha.
To settle.
You
to
just want a
settle.
settlement.
That was our
Okay.
settlement number because that's what we theorized it would cost to rehabilitate the building with those contingencies in.
And they refused that and gave you a settlement number of 37.4.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So one of the other charges was to understand what a new junior high might cost. This is a similar sized building, just completed in Jordan School District, roughly, my gosh, what is that going to be? 7,400 South Redwood Road. It required a demolition of an existing school as this. So there were some good comparables here. The ground, same general topography. Their site was more rectangular, but we think these things all led to a good comparable. And we started to do some sort of inflationary rate. And so they bid theirs in 2017. We inflated at least at this time, the analysis was late in 2020. Hey, it better come up at least 19.6%, $200 a square foot, roughly 36.7 million was the guess from the architect when they presented those numbers. And we said, oh, that's really interesting. $200 a square foot. We've never seen a building that cheap in the last 5 years. So go ahead to the next slide, Stephen. Oh, sorry, I did another summary here. The MHTN replacement was 44 million. Let's just round up. They're an architectural design team that built and estimated Jordan District's building. Yeah, they do a lot of work. Granite School District's estimate is higher. We think 54 million because most of our buildings are coming in at 290 to 300 a square foot. So we just looked at MHTN and we said, well, we appreciate your advice. Now, you know what other school districts are getting bids at, et cetera, et cetera. They said, yes, we do. Boy, the 200, it's not going to happen either. I mean, you can't even build an elementary school for less than 240, I think was the latest cheap number that we had. So we really think to be true and conservative in representing numbers to the board, we think we need to look towards a $55 million junior high. Okay, so that's laying out, here are options. We can be in it with insurance to rehabilitate. We could settle at 37.4 and pick up the delta roughly, we're going to call it 20 million in our bond estimates and rebuild the school. So next slide, please. If you really get down to the building and construction side of it, we gave some numbers. We think a junior high is going to be 285 to 304. That's why we're pushing towards that $55 million mark. Now keep in mind, those are your hard costs. That's not your design fee. That's not permits. That's not paying water impact fees. That's not paying all of those soft costs that we're going to have to pay to rebuild this. So again, we're rounding up here. So we're 55 million. Yeah, that feels pretty good to cover all those costs. Next slide.
I'm sorry, Don, the 55 does cover those soft costs or it does not?
It does. So the alternatives, we remodel to get this from our schematic phase to construction drawings would be 6 to 8 months. We would bid the project. It would take 24 to 28 months to complete. So it's a total of 30 to 36 months. From the day we kind of get the nod from the board where to head. Again, my concerns, many unknowns in the remodel of a seismically damaged building. Negotiating change orders with the insurance company would be a challenge. And notice I'm couching that terminology, a challenge. We would always recommend that we're going to need, $2 or $3 million worth of upgrades to make this building worth its salt when it opens up on day one. So there's a capital investment from the board, even if we were to go through the remodel side, okay? The new build, we can finance that through our municipal building authority. We would take the settlement and tell you plus 20 million. We would begin demolition of the building immediately. We would want to prepare the site so that when the designs roll off, we're ready to go. We would demolish because there's a risk of having that vacant building that we're not going to use. There's security concerns, everything. So we would pretty much just demolish quickly. And that would also include asbestos abatement. So no time like the present to get in and take out asbestos and get it demolished.
Would we be looking to build this for 6, 7, 8, or would we just, what's our idea?
Yeah, it would be as a 6, 7, 8, but the building itself really is scaled at 185,000 square feet to be a 3-grade model. Yeah. Okay. If we were to select an existing design, something that we've walked into in another district, hey, this isn't bad, this works for us, we like it, it's a good building, we could design for our site in a 3 to 6 month period. If you want to commission a new design, something brand new that's never been used before, we're going to tell you 8 to 12 months, and it's probably going to be 12 months. So that really changes your timeline. We could be anywhere from 24 months is a good number to build a junior high. And so depending upon your design model, you're somewhere between 30 and 36 months. A new school, it's 3 years from the day you give the nod. Grabbing somebody else's plan, we could do it in probably 2.5 years. So the real concern with the new one right now in this explosive construction climate is cost containment. That's our hardest thing to do. But it's somewhat easier to do in an existing floor plan, right? A new floor plan, cost containment is a challenge. Nobody's seen it, nobody's built it. They haven't counted out how many bolts and bricks are already in it. If you get an existing plan, there's a known quantity and they bid tighter and better.
Let's go Nicole, Chris, and Julie.
Sorry. So aside from West Jordan, are there other existing plans that you have walked through? Have you walked through West Jordan? Are there other buildings that you would say, this is a decent plan, let's go with this?
There are probably a good handful. Davis District has 2 models right now that are pretty darn good that we could walk through. You have some recent builds in Canyons, Midvale Middle and Mount Jordan. I'd probably have a tendency to say Midvale Middle over Mount Jordan. But like I say, there are 4 or 5 models that we could quickly walk through, talk about, see what size they are, you know, and run some quick math as we go through. We did not want to be presumptuous and really get down into the weeds with those, but we've all in my department toured a lot of the new buildings anyway. It's kind of what we do to go see what everybody's doing and what costs are.
Well, architects love to have you walk through their buildings. That's their best advertising.
That is their marketing tool. And so most of us have seen a lot of these buildings and there are really a good handful to consider.
So my question kind of goes along with Nicole's. If we do the remodel, do we use the old plans from, I mean, like the exact same, what
Oh.
it looks like, or would it be?
It will look exactly, it will look pretty close to exactly as it does today, but the structural changes are what counts. We're not really able to move a lot of interior walls, or it's really designed in one way and can only be rebuilt in one way. As Doug said, with some lipstick.
Julie. Yeah, so I don't know the Westlake community very well. Can anybody give some feedback on, you know, which of these two, would they want to just get in the building as soon as possible? Or do we think that they would be more inclined to do a new design? Knowing that none of us here is saying what the community would actually want. I'm just wondering if anyone has a beat on that.
And I'm going to ask Terry to add some color
I was just gonna
commentary
say,
here.
it's probably between me and Terry on that one.
Yeah, I will say that the school itself, the administrators in the school are concerned about having to continue a long-term presence at the Westlake Elementary campus. It is very difficult to run a junior high in an elementary campus with a bunch of put together things. Gym classes next to impossible, not really having great science labs. We're having to bring in additional support so they can do some of their CTE work that they're required to do. So from the administrator's perspective, that's a challenge. And I think from the kids' perspective, I have to ride the bus that far every morning.
Can I give some parent perspective from what I've heard? Is this, you have it as a very small bullet point, but it's really on the minds of families. It's that unknown seismically damaged buildings. Some of them are saying, wait a minute, you're even entertaining the thought of fixing this? I've seen the pictures. You have to rebuild walls and you don't know exactly what that foundation looks like. And you want me to be okay putting my kids or my grandkids in a building that you cannot guarantee is safe? So that's some of the feedback. I mean, Westlake actually resides in Terry's district, but I have some ties to that just with, you know, that's the area I grew up in. And so I still have families that I know there, and my parents still live in Westlake boundaries. And so that's probably the biggest piece of feedback. I do understand the administrator aspect, but I just think that's a really important bullet point that we have to consider. Terry, do you want to expound
Amen to
anything?
what you said, and I think the Westlake community would be happy with whatever new school and trust us to move forward and want us to move forward as quickly as possible. That's my take on the Westlake community. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, let me, I'm deciding when to weigh in, so I guess now's a good time because you're all looking at me. Our administrative, our inclination is, hey, if I can get a brand new building there for 20 million bucks,
Yeah.
how do you pass that up for all of these same reasons? Then financing becomes a concern. And what the last slides will show is the MBA Municipal Bonding Authority. The board, the school board, you are also a municipal bonding authority. And so you can issue bonds. And this would be the kind of a project that this would be an appropriate thing to do. The concern is on everybody's mind, is how does that impact our long-term capital outlay program? And the answer is, Don's pulling the microphone down. Do you want to say it or should I say it? It doesn't. Because the way we talked about this morning was kind of, we've got Capital One, we're not talking about a bank, and we've got Capital Two. Capital One is our general capital budget. It's the one that we've got, that we've had and we continue to have. And Capital Two is what we kickstarted with the bond. And as the bonds are retired, the board moves the levy from debt service to Capital Two. Now, ultimately, when the bonds are all retired and that's all been moved over to Capital Two, then Capital One and Capital Two combine, and we move forward with a pay-as-you-go, which is the long-range plan. This can be funded over a 10-year. Did you do 10 and 20?
I have a 10 and 15. 20 did not really seem to be a good economic buy down for us. It just didn't seem to be
We
necessary.
can do the 10 or the 15 completely out of Capital One. Now, it does slow some typical projects down. Some things get slowed down, but it does not impact the long-range plan timeline any more than the economy already has. So frankly, our inclination is to move forward on the rebuild side, unless you all look tonight and say, "Oh, Martin, that's bad. We need to bring that back to the board for a vote and action." Otherwise, the next time you'd see this would be us.
Can you expound on that, the Capital One? What projects are you talking about specifically?
What's in Capital
Sure.
One?
And again, this is the colloquial term that we use, so some way to call it. So Capital One is our approximate $24 million a year budget. You'll see a bunch of purchases coming up for chiller replacements, our elementary school security remodels, everything we do, patching and paving of asphalt, buying of bleachers, all of that is in capital, right? And so in the 15-year model, it's about 2 some odd million a year that comes out of it. And in the 10-year model, it's about 3 some odd million. So there's about a $1 million and a quarter dollar delta between the two financing options. That being said, that's something that we can manage internally and how we're churning out and building our projects.
No tax increase.
No tax increase, right? This is using existing revenue stream, and we feel comfortable that we can manage our projects within that existing cash flow scheme without being a negative impact. And the reality is, the one thing that we always say, hey, it's nice to get a new school for 20 million, but remember, this school was scheduled to be rebuilt a couple of decades from now, right? I just plucked that out of the equation. We don't need it for another 70 years now. So when you start roping all of this together, how does it impact pay-as-you-go? How does it impact the fact that, yeah, you know what? I was going to have to put a new air conditioning system in that building in the next 5 years anyway. Okay, there's $2 million that I don't have to spend. So it all starts adding up in our mind, and the cumulative impact is, yeah, this makes a lot of sense to us, not only from a serve students, serve the community standpoint, but from just kind of that basic financial side. Yeah, it starts to make sense to us as a really good thing to look towards.
So, yeah, that's just what I wanted to make sure that 3 or 2 million or whatever it is ends up being, or we're not going to be like, no, you don't get a new boiler this year. You feel confident that whatever it is that we're taking that 2 million from, we're still going to be able to cover the essentials of what we need.
We are, and keep in mind now note that the first was 4 years of this. We're just making small interest only payments, right? By the time that real big payment kicks in, our elementary security projects are done. And that's been our single largest capital expenditure. So we kind of projected out where we're going to be and what secondaries you're going to now need 5 years out. And we started thinking, you know what? This blends well with kind of the needs side, our current expenditures, and then how those expenditures sunset out. So we're feeling pretty good about the ebb and flow of our cash flow model.
Connie, you had a
I
comment.
just wanted and it's out of Capital Two, where we're doing the other parts from that list of.
Yep, right,
helping
yeah, yeah.
schools out.
Yeah, and that's just kind of the pay as you go. At the end of the day, it's one big fund, but we can still service this out of our existing cash flows.
Right,
Mhm.
and that's, I mean, seems like that's gone up a little bit, which is good, because it used to be only 17 million.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think it's great that we can do, have that possibility that.
Just to put it in very blunt terms, if we decide to give the nod and say, you know what, let's rebuild, it will in no way delay the addition on Taylorsville High or the remodel of such and such elementary that's already in the works and
Nope.
on the list. So it will not affect those,
That is correct.
that 40-year long-range plan that we've got. Because I think that will be our challenge, is to communicate that well so the public isn't
Yep.
just drawing
Yep.
the dot between two lines that really doesn't exist. You
And-
had a comment? Oh,
Well, if I can add to that, and also if we chose to just remodel, we couldn't take that 20 million and now put it into those schools. We just wouldn't get the 20 million.
That's correct.
And so either way, the timeline is the same. It can't be moved up either.
Right.
So I'm gonna ask the question, I think I understand it, but I just, because I know we're gonna get it, Connie and I probably mostly because we're Taylorsville. Why is it that we can't do this type of thing to make up for that difference now that we're seeing in our capital two?
It really is that a municipal building authority is not the right vehicle to do your traditional capital expenditures. It's a vehicle for school districts to take on the unforeseen. It's an opportunistic funding model. If you're going to do the other things, it's that general obligation bond model that you use. So that's all of our new builds, our additions and things of that nature. You can't look a bond council square in the eye and say, I didn't foresee this addition to a building that I projected 4 years ago.
This
I can
really
look a
comes
bond
down to an
council-
emergency situation.
Yeah, I can look a bond council and say, I wasn't planning on an earthquake that took out a junior high, and they would say, we concur.
And I get that, but I know that we're gonna have those people say,
Yep.
right, but we could look at them and say, we didn't know that we were gonna have the price of steel double. We didn't know that, we were gonna have COVID happen. So, I mean, I'm just asking that because I
Yeah.
know we're gonna get those questions.
I think it's really the legal framework that the two finance mechanisms are set up to deal with, right? And I would say that this is the no-brainer. Any kind of other methodologies, if there are certain opportunities that you would need, you could use this, but for our 40-year plan, you're not only in a gray area, I'm going to call that a charcoal gray area. And I have a couple of attorneys in the room and I'm risking that, but I think I'm pretty safe in saying it's very charcoal gray.
A bond election is a big legal process. It's like taking out, this is going to be an imprecise metaphor, but it's like taking out a mortgage to buy a house. Where an MBA, when you've got an emergency, you do a home equity loan. It's not the big thing. It's, oh my gosh, something's come up that I need to deal with. And the legislature's given us a tool to deal with this kind of an emergency, with this kind of you wouldn't use MBAs to run your capital program, but you can use, it's designed for use to fix an emergency like an earthquake has a problem.
So can I use that example if we have people bring it up?
Yes, oh, absolutely.
And I would hope that once they just understand that the MBA is more emergency unforeseen, that's different than pricing on product going through the roof or I mean, we can hope, but
I just say that because
I get it.
I've already had community members, well, why can't, let's just rebond or let's do another bond, and I'm like.
Yeah. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just want to make sure. So earlier you were actually, I think you, Martin, were talking about the approval process of this. So this is not something that we would need to vote on eventually?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, yeah.
You would need to vote on the
And-
bonding.
So we
Yes.
would need to vote on which of these two options to do. And then if we voted to rebuild, we'd have to vote again on whether we wanted to do a 10-year or a 15-year bond.
So what you're doing is
Don, let me say it this way. I'm informing the board that I think we'd like to move forward with the MBA rebuild option. And so unless, were you to say to me, Martin, we don't think that's a good idea. If you were to say that to me right now, then we would not move forward. Otherwise, what we'll do is what you'll see the next time is we'll start talking about the bonding, and what will come to the board is presentations on a 10-year, probably a 15-year.
I'm going to have to defer to Dave and some others, but and Mitch Robinson, but we all feel comfortable that a 10-year makes sense financially. A 10-year also sunsets at the exact same time that our existing other bonds would sunset. So 2032, we all sunset our debt at the same time.
So when this would come to the board for action or for rejection would be when we bring this to you, when we come to you to ask for permission to move forward with a 10-year bond. And that
So
would-
there are a lot of like administrative reports where, we're not voting necessarily on policy, but we are giving kind of a nod or just kind of a thumbs up in essence that, we will have to vote on the
I said,
bond
yes,
piece of it.
we're
but-
looking forward to this.
But there's going to be a lot of times where superintendency comes and presents things and they've done their research. And if we feel good about it, we're just going to say, great, let's go forward. And then when they need there are certain things we have to vote on. Bonding is one of them. And so that would come up
that make
in a
sense?
future meeting.
Yeah, so then would this be like on our next agenda?
I don't know how quickly we'll be able to put it together.
No, it will be agendas down the road. It will be, I'm going to guess, we're in March, probably could be as early as your first May would be the earliest that we could bring it. The reality is that we can settle with the insurance company and come forward and start the process using their $37 million. Matter of fact, that gets you a year and a half into the process before you need to pull the trigger. What we would look to Lewis Young and others for is, when's the opportune time? When's the best financial window to pull the trigger on this? So I'd hate to set an arbitrary date if they're saying, hey, I want you to wait a month, or hey, I want you to come a month early. I'm going to let them tell us strike now. And you just saw them do that with the refinancing of the bond, right? But I could expect something before a certain retirement takes place coming before the board. That would be my best guess time
The
window.
record show, I rolled my eyes really hard.
I just, I feel like the time is of the essence here.
Right.
And so I just want to offer my own support, and I don't speak for everyone, but I'm sure we're all on the same page that we will move on it on one decision or another as quickly as you can get us information. Because
And-
I think that's a really huge part of this.
Now, and before, I guess, if I could go to the last slide real quick, there's another process that we're currently engaged in. So FEMA was able to open up some public assistance funds. And frankly, that earthquake, as we've been told by FEMA, the only reason that the state of Utah had damage and costs enough to qualify for public assistance was good old Westlake. So they said, hey, this is interesting. You qualified as a state because of this. Hey, there's this. If you think education has little acronyms and names, FEMA's got us beat. I can't believe it, but FEMA's got us beat. So this Papa G funding looks at something and says, listen, we understand that if the damage and cost to repair is greater than 50% of rebuilding, you can qualify for this because our job is disaster mitigation. So a future seismic event won't hurt you. We're going to try and get you qualified. So we're in this process working with them to qualify. Now, they may not cover all of it, but if we get qualified, there'll be some more money there. And so we can structure that and use that for bond repayment and all of these things. So we're not just sitting there saying, hey, let's do the debt and walk off. We're going to try and reduce the district burden as much as possible based upon what FEMA can help us do.
Don, are those FEMA funds restricted to debt service? And
They are
debt payments, or can they be applied to construction as well?
So again, it's in their mind, it's one and the same, right? So they'll give a certain amount of money. If we've already incurred debt for this building, they give it only for the project. If we've incurred debt, they're willing to say, go ahead and use that to handle your debt service in the way you see fit.
I'm not trying to commit you to a number, but what order of magnitude, if you can, could we
I cannot.
anticipate
I
from
was on a
FEMA?
2:00 call with FEMA this afternoon, and they wouldn't even come close to giving me an order of magnitude. I mean, they're all involved in the process, and oh, it's early, and you've got to, you know, it looks good, but they will never put a dollar figure to it.
Chris
Just a-
and
I
then
just have a
Terry.
Quick question. Do they have, does FEMA have a timeline for this earthquake that I know in Magna, they had a date that they said you have to have a certain, cost in by.
Yep.
Do we have that with FEMA? for
So,
us?
so we were part of that original deadline, right? And so they qualified the state in January. And so we had, from our first call 3 weeks ago, a 60-day window to get them all of our damage claims in, and we've already submitted. So we're set with them, but then we're running another parallel track on this Papa G funding cycle. So it's super confusing, and I'm glad they keep repeating it to us on the phone calls because it becomes more clear each call.
So the Westlake community will have heard already that we've been discussing this tonight. So can I be clear so that when I'm asked, if the board approves, we're going to go forward, accepting the insurance settlement? How quickly will that money become available?
Doug Larson, thoughts on settlement deadline?
Money is available with the settlement agreement, just as fast as the insurance company is willing to cut a check. And that is, sorry, the insurance company is ready to settle. They're anxious to settle.
So
I can't give you an actual date, but they are anxious to settle and they want to resolve this matter with us as soon as
I understood
possible.
it. If we go that route, our first step will be to bring the building down.
We'll start
We'll have
working
the funds
towards
to do that
abatement
and
and
start.
demolition while simultaneously looking at floor plans and seeing what fits on the site and what is cost effective.
So the building will be tore down pretty quick. We're going to go with an existing floor plan because community involvement is nice, but takes a lot of time and we don't have a lot. This community is wanting to move now. So we are going to commit to a floor plan that is out there that's been used that will fit on the site. Right?
Yeah.
And so I think that needs to be open so the community knows, and I think they'll accept that and be fine with that. So we're moving forward now. we're
And I think
rebuilding.
it's another timeline, because you're starting to get into the timeline so people can manage their expectations
they're
and kind of
wanting to
know.
know.
So, as part of our communication, Ben, this is probably more directed to you. It would be kind of nice. I know we don't know FEMA funds, and at this point, if we get anything from FEMA, great. I mean, that just helps cut down that 20 million, even if it's $1 million, 2 million, goodness, we'll take it, right? We're not going to complain or bite the hand that feeds us. So, you have kind of the money side, but on the communication side, we still need to be clear that they're not going to see walls going up in the fall. I mean, they need to be able to know, hey, we're in a process here. So some kind of communication maybe that, hey, you're getting a new building, but it's going to take 3 years.
Well, there's two aspects to that. And just to be clear, days after this happened a year ago, we had people saying, don't raise my taxes to rebuild that building, right? So there's people who are super excited about getting a new building that we need to go through and lay out the timeline and express the sentiments of the board and kind of detail and lay out this for them. At the same time, we also need to communicate how this is going to be funded and that taxes will not be increased.
Sure.
Mind you, we're also in the middle of that process of preparing to communicate on our tax increase this summer as well. And so we've built out the timeline on that. And so once we have a firm idea of that, I'll put together a communication strategy and bring that back to board leadership at the appropriate time. You can share with the rest of the board.
So keep saying this is approved, or do we have to vote on?
You'll accept it, you'll accept
The bond.
very shortly, you'll accept at a board meeting the settlement. That could be as soon as, and so that's, but accepting the settlement, the implication is we're rebuilding.
Yeah.
And I think it's very fair for you to tell whomever asks, and we'll report it this way. We're moving forward to accept the settlement, which means we will be rebuilding as quickly as possible.
I would point out too, that I've already spoken to 3 reporters about this very issue today alone. So I highly suspect there will be something in the news about the direction the board is going as soon as tomorrow and probably by the weekend, if not by then.
But so next month on our agenda, we would approve to accept the settlement?
As soon as we can get the settlement in, yeah, that's.
Okay.
I would think so.
Done.
We can set it in motion tomorrow.
Come on, Doug, get that going tomorrow.
Can we send out some type of communication to the parents and the people in that community, just so orders approved for a rebuild, accepting insurance settlement? We don't have to give all the details.
Yeah, and I would
think it
indicate
will.
that we'll have a forthcoming meeting with our patrons as soon as we have more details.
I think that's good, and then
Yeah.
they can say, hey.
I think we'd have somebody out tomorrow afternoon.
Are you all right with that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
It'd be
let's do
pretty
it.
general, but I like the idea.
A quick question, Don. I know this is getting kind of into the nuts and bolts, but it's a STEM school. Will that impact any using an existing floor plan? Will we have to modify it any, or is that just?
No. The plants that have been developed can easily accommodate Tyler's STEM system. If it were a high school, probably you'd want some additional specialty, but the junior high model can accept it.
So I have another question, because I know some will ask me, how much did we get from the insurance? And that, are we okay to say that or no?
Can we get the insurance on board with this before we make public announcements, please?
Okay, well, I'm just telling you, I've got some council people who will be asking me.
Well,
a little
we
more
just
specific.
This
put
is a
up,
public meeting,
we just put
right?
up in this public meeting that we're
Yeah.
talking about just 37, 38
Doug's gonna
million
take
dollars.
one more pass at him. He's pretty tough.
It's a public meeting, so,
37, 38 million dollars.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you for this. I just want to state to those listening in, and I mean, goodness, this has been just a straightforward presentation, easy to understand. But please know the hours and hours of work behind the scenes from everybody, working collectively together. This is,
Huge applause.
yeah, this is
guys.
a
Doug.
lot of work to get us to this point. And personally, I'm a Westlake Mustang. I went there. So this is, I think this will bring, obviously there's going to be those that are concerned, but I do think that for the Westlake families, this will breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief that they know the building they're getting is going to be safe. So thank you again. We appreciate all your work done. Well, okay, next on our agenda, we'll turn the time over to Martin for a superintendent report.
Just 2 items. One's a little longer and one's a little shorter. So the longer one, I'd like to emphasize something that from tonight, Rick talked about the ESSER 2 plan, and that was really in conjunction with a presentation from the last board meeting regarding next year's delivery pattern. No teacher will need to teach in person and distance at the same time next year. This is really exciting, and it shows that part of the pandemic is shortly going to be behind us. We're excited about that. Many remember that last summer we had a couple of board meetings that went late into the evening. The board took a crucial step, recognizing the great burden that teaching dual modalities places on teachers. and designated Fridays as a distance-only day to give teachers additional planning and collaboration time to be able to deal with that great burden. You may recall, we requested a waiver from the State Board of Education to go below the 990 instructional hours requirement. I'm aware that last week, the state board gave approval for a one-year extension of that 990-hour waiver for districts that needed it. However, given what we've just discussed, we will not need it in Granite because the burden of teaching dual modalities will be lifted and gone. So I want to really honor our teachers for that difficult work, which they will continue to bear through the end of this school year. We've learned a lot this school year, among other things. Face-to-face, in-person instruction is the best modality for the overwhelming majority of our students. For those who do thrive in a digital environment, we will, Rick talked about this as well, continue to provide synchronous and asynchronous options into the future, and really as long as that demand continues. We've also learned that even when teachers develop masterful distance instruction plans, again, whether synchronous or asynchronous, many students simply do not engage. The quantitative data that we've been able to gather through sign-ons and so on in terms of Fridays, the difference between Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday engagement and Friday is a drop of 2/3. A drop of 2/3, more than half, drop of 2/3. Now, sometimes that's just plain the student's choice, but the majority of the time that reflects other conditions going on in the student's life. While distance Fridays have been a lifeline for our teachers, there has been significant cost for a good number of our students. And I'm grateful that we will be past that. I've heard from numerous families, I'm sure you have too, that they've enjoyed the distance Fridays for a number of reasons. You've likely heard as well, as have I, from numerous families upon whom distance Fridays have placed an additional and sometimes crushing burden. I'm grateful that we'll be past that as well. So we do look forward with excitement to the fall, to our doors being open to all students 5 days a week with no teachers assigned to teach both modalities at the same time. That's my first report. My second report, Karen and I were in the meeting with the health department this morning. And an exciting piece that I'd like to share, they asked us, what's the possibility of making our schools, our high schools available so that 16 and 17-year-olds could have the option to be immunized before school gets out this year? And we said, oh, we can't help you with that. No, we said, are you kidding? We would be more than happy to help with that. Understand, everybody at home or here, nobody's inoculating a child, 16 or 17-year-old, without affirmative parental permission. Okay, that's, in fact, it's not completely clear if the parent.
And it's not required in any way.
No, there's no, if the parent has to be there even, I'm not sure if the parent has to be there, if they can do it by but anyway, nobody's getting an inoculation without verified parental permission. But the prospect of having that available to our older high school kids before school even gets out was, I think, a really exciting
Before
one.
it starts, not before.
No, before it gets out. They want to do that. They want to do that this spring.
That's right. It was May.
So, yeah, the governor is absolutely committed to having it available to all adults beginning April 1st. Looking to get 16 and 17-year-olds before school gets out. So that's just a couple of months from now. There is just fist pounding to make sure that everybody understands that the messages elsewhere notwithstanding, whatever might happen on April 10th with the school stuff stays in place through July 1st. And that's notably masks worn. And we said, well, what about masks worn even at recess until July 1st? And then we'll see what goes into place thereafter as we go into the fall. So That's just a report from the meeting
The,
this
the
morning.
thing that could change that is obviously the governor himself, right? I mean, he's the one that has access to that state COVID manual. It'd have to come, that emergency health order would have to end. So obviously, the county health department is gonna just wait for that word to come, from the state level. But yeah, and to also to make note, I believe it's only the Pfizer that qualifies for 16 and 17-year-olds. So they wouldn't qualify for the Moderna or the Johnson & Johnson. So we'd be working out those specifics with the county health department to make sure that, we had the right vaccine at the right site
Well,
for
and
them.
we don't do any of that ourselves. That's all CNS, and
Right.
that's what would be allocated to the community nursing services, and they would come provide that.
But for those, there may be some listening in that are like, wait a minute, I thought it was only 18 and up for these vaccines, but the Pfizer is approved for 16 and up. So just to make that clear. Chris?
They still qualify for the high school part, or would
They-
sorry, would they still be?
18-year-olds, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, 18-year-olds will have two options then. They can either get it because it's April 1st, or they can get it through the school offense.
Yeah, theoretically, so, I mean, if we have seniors that are already 18, they could get it on their own after April 1st. Yeah. Comorbidity. Mhm.
16, 17-year-olds with comorbidity can get it now.
So exciting news. And I just have to say that our relationship over the past year with that county health department has really proven very helpful. And they're the health experts, we're the education experts. We've taken some time to learn each other's trade at some level, to respect each other. But our county health department has really been working side by side, and we have the same goal, which is to keep the schools open as long as possible, but while keeping people safe. So just wanted to give them a little shout out before we adjourn, because that's been a critical piece of our success this year, keeping our doors open and students in person for those that want to be in person. So with that, thanks, board. It's been a great study session. Do you have another comment, Terry?
Well, just quick, you should have received an email from USBA. Tomorrow night is a Zoom meeting for our regional meetings. If you haven't gotten that email, just let me know and we'll forward it to you. And you just have to click on our night, which is tomorrow night at 6 o'clock, and that will be by Zoom. Should last about an hour. Adjourn at 7:30, so hour and a
Hour and a
half.
half, yeah. Is there anybody who has not received that link? Chris, you haven't received it? All right. Terry, would you mind forwarding that
I'll
to
get
Chris? Make
that.
sure she gets that, and those who can attend. Thank you. With that, I will, unless there's anything else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye.